All right. I'm super pumped for this episode because I haven't talked to this dude and we figured out 12 years. So I want to welcome my college roommate and good friend in college, Feras. Feras, how you doing, my man? It's been way too long.
Yeah, I'm doing well. It has been quite some time, but I mean, I think you said has it been 17 years? It feels like it's been 17 years. It's like a long time ago, but
Right.
I'm glad we can kind of reconnect and listen to a couple of episodes. I think that what you're doing is phenomenal. I really appreciate being the Muslim representative, just to kind of give you that voice. But this is it's really cool, and I'm excited to have this conversation.
Awesome. Likewise, man. Well, I mean, I think the most, first of all, before we get into some of the stuff I want to talk about, you joked about being the Muslim representative, but in all honesty, I was thinking back when I was driving back from the gym this morning of just Muslims that I've known over the course of my life, and I'm pretty sure you were the first one that I ever met, like live in person. And it didn't hit me as something extraordinary at the time. It's just like, you're learning about different experiences and different people. But as I reflect on it, it was just really cool to be around you and get that experience. And
Yeah,
it's sad too that I didn't have that until I was in college in 2006. But
yeah.
yeah, I wanted to share that with you because I don't know if that's normal or what. But
Yeah. I don't know if you remember this. I think it might have been sophomore. You actually got a chance to go to Sycamore.
mm-hmm,
So to meet a couple of people through Keenan. I
right,
think I stayed at his place, but it was interesting because like it was pretty homogenous, at least from what I saw. So I mean, it doesn't surprise me just because I know from what I know about Sycamore is that it's largely homogenous, and I don't know if you had that opportunity.
yeah,
Did you? I mean, were there any like other than Catholics, or did you guys have other faiths within that?
man.
Within your town?
I really can't. I think I knew a couple of Jehovah's Witnesses, and the only reason I knew that is because they didn't celebrate their birthdays at school. But I'm as I reflect back, like I really don't think there was a lot of opportunity for learning about or just being immersed with people that believe something different. So it's part about the college experience, I guess. And so I was
Absolutely.
happy that I had that. But speaking of college, so you and I met in 2006 at DePaul, Go Blue Demons, and we were paired up in a dorm together freshman year, and so we didn't know each other. And I think there was, if I remember right, it was me, you, and Will Irvin, and Will was the kind of like the odd man out where they like overbooked
Right.
rooms, and then
Yep.
he had bunk beds and all this stuff.
Right.
What do you recall about us first meeting?
Yeah. I mean, for me, it was. I mean, obviously, that's my first experience being sharing a room with someone else that's a complete stranger. So I think that
Right.
in itself was just gelling. And I heard some horror stories about just bad roommates, but I mean, obviously, I think that we had a pretty good experience because we stayed in touch throughout college. But I mean, I think that the one thing that I'll say is that in terms of feeling comfortable with another person, just sharing kind of information about faith and just other family and all that stuff. I mean, I felt pretty comfortable with you freshman year, and I'd like to discuss this maybe a little bit later. But there was a moment, and you probably don't remember this, but there was a moment that was pretty pivotal, and I appreciated that in terms of uh, you know pressure that kind of existed. I mean, obviously we all go through peer pressure, but um, something that was pretty monumental that I still remember to this day.
I'm excited to hear about that. I'll make a note. We're going to come back to that. The one thing before we go off on a serious note here, the I have a bunch of stories when your name comes up, but I think the main one that I always think of is I remember you were going through, I think it was Ramadan, and you had fasted through the day, and so you would go play ball, work out, and then get one of those pre-made meals at the student center, whatever we called it.
Yep.
And I remember it had some sort of meat in there, and so you took one bite, and you're like, Miles, and we were like watching South Park or something like that. You're like, Miles, is that pork? I was like, yeah, I think so. And you're like, damn it. And you just like chucked it right in the garbage. It was like, I'm sure you had a long day at school or like whatever. You're like, of course, I get to eat. And
Right.
all of a sudden,
Right.
but I don't know why
Yeah.
that stuck with me. I was like, oh
Right.
man, this poor kid, all he wants is
Yeah.
some dinner.
Right.
Um, But let's talk about Feras before you get to school, because like I said, I don't know much about
Sure.
your upbringing. I mean, obviously you mentioned that you're Muslim. I mean, what was faith like in your household? Was it something that you grew up with?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question. I grew up kind of in a unique situation compared to like a lot of Muslims that go to a lot of the Muslims that I met at DePaul. My family was probably more ritualistic around faith more than anything. We adhered to fasting during Ramadan, but generally, I think that culture played a big factor in our household, and I think from the part of the world that my family comes from, Palestine, culture and religion are kind of intertwined. But I really didn't have a strong connection to faith, and I think that the encounters that I had, because I went to probably went through this too, but we had like a weekend school. We had these summer programs that my parents kind of wanted us out of the house, and there was something to do. But my experience with those schools, because like they were like essentially Muslim weekend schools. That it wasn't a good environment to learn. Very kind of confrontational. Just we had, I would say, probably bad representatives of the faith
Hmm.
that kind of turned me off. And I would go. We would have these over the summer. I had an uncle that would take us to the mosque on Fridays. That's kind of our holy day. And I remember that being exclusively in the Arabic language. And I know a little bit of Arabic, but it's not something that I'm comfortable with. So growing up, you're listening to something in an entirely different language that you don't understand. So it's very difficult to develop that connection. So I would say probably I was more culturally Muslim more than anything, and
Hmm.
I didn't really have a strong foundation in the faith, other than some of those rituals like like fasting that happens year round or
Got it.
annually.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And so, are you first generation? Are your parents your first generation?
uh, yes, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Um, and I mean, what brought them over from Palestine? I mean, was there a story that went with that, or just trying to
Yeah,
see what else is better out there?
yeah. So my mom actually came. In '67 there was a big war in
Yep.
Palestine. So my grandparents brought them over as a result of the war.
Oh
So they
wow.
thought there was also other opportunities. We had family in Chicago, so they made the connection from that. So she came over with her parents. My dad, on the other hand, he came I think maybe 15 years later, and uh, his situation was a bit different. He actually traveled from a couple of different countries in the Middle East trying to find an opportunity, um, to make a better life.
Hmm.
He came from a very rural background. Uh, not no one in that area was very college educated, so he thought, okay, this is an opportunity to really kind of establish myself, and what better place to do it than America? So he came over, 15 years later, and started his life. A few years after that, started his life, married my mom, and I came. So.
That's awesome. And you have siblings, correct?
Yeah, I have. So I'm the oldest of four. So I have a younger sister and two younger brothers. So
Got
that
it.
in itself has, a lot of. I think a lot of what I did from a cultural standpoint, because again, it wasn't something that following certain rules wasn't something that I did it for religious reasons, but I just setting a good example for my siblings. So a lot of the rules, like I didn't drink, didn't smoke, didn't do a lot of the things that probably are very um, accustomed to kind of the college experience, and a lot of that's probably just more peer pressure and setting a good example for my siblings.
Hmm. That makes sense. So you mentioned that you didn't really have a good representative of the faith when you were a kid. I mean, what was the relationship like with faith with your parents and your siblings growing up?
Yeah, you know, I we didn't really discuss it. I mean, I think that generally speaking, and my dad was working, 14, 16 hours a day. So a
Man.
lot of my interactions with him were maybe on Sundays, but we didn't really have uh, conversations around faith just because he was so exhausted. He was working 9 day, and you know, my family really wasn't connected to it. And I think that a lot of it has kind of stems from grandparents that probably didn't do the best of jobs of educating their kids about faith. So a lot of it was kind of following rules, and so I really didn't have a strong foundational experience with it. And more than anything, I probably came away from high school and into my freshman year questioning a lot.
Hmm.
rather than having a very strong foundational understanding of a STEM.
Yeah, I mean, my dad and I talked a couple episodes ago, and he mentioned that he questioned a lot. He went to school in Texas in the Bible Belt. He did the same thing freshman year. And I think it's just part of growing up. And I had some questions at that point too, but I wasn't nearly far along on that spiritual journey as I am now. But I mean, for you growing up and then getting to a place where you're living on your own in a dorm, I mean, what were the types of things that you were starting to question? Or, I mean, were there things that bothered you, or was it just like, man, this doesn't jive?
Yeah. I was just I don't know. I think it was just extremely turned off by just the imposition of faith.
Mm,
There was a very restrictive. It was very restrictive. I didn't have a good understanding of anything really about religion. So, and for me, I think more than anything, um, maybe we'll talk about this, but I think there was one pivotal moment in my childhood that impacted my relationship with faith. So, and I think that 9/11 played a big role in that. So for me, I was kind of fearful of representing myself as a Muslim,
yeah,
because you don't want to be alienated, you don't want to be treated differently, and I think that kind of carried over into college, that first year, not knowing that I think college campuses are much more, especially DePaul, is much more open-minded
yeah,
and more pluralistic around different faiths, but I didn't know that. So for me, I was very um, sensitive about exploring that because of a fear of being ostracized or treated differently.
yeah. I
Um,
mean, that's a very real thing. What I mean, you mentioned this pivotal moment. I mean, tell me about that story. What was that about?
yeah, so I think it was eighth grade, our eighth grade year when 9/11 happened,
Yeah.
and I came from a school that was I was probably maybe say where I was a minority, and I think at that age, you know, if there's something different about you, some people are not going to be as sensitive about that, and I think people had very strong feelings about Muslims around 9/11, and um, if they found out that you're practicing, I think especially targets were girls with scarves,
Yeah.
the way they were mistreated, and that made me kind of fearful. It's like, hey, I don't want to associate with this, just out of more than anything fear. And at that age, you really don't feel comfortable uh, talking about your faith. But I think that was something that I was always afraid of, is being treated differently. And we saw some hate crimes in our area.
Mm.
Um, so it was something that we were very kind of aware of. So I would say it's not necessarily me objecting to the religion more than just trying to avoid any sort of tension
Got it.
with others.
Did you know anybody that was, harassed or affected in any way after 9/11?
Yeah, I mean, I think particularly not even necessarily my family in particular, because largely, we're very cultural, and none of the women in my family wear scarves.
Mm-hmm.
The one person I was always worried about was my grandma, because she had it,
Mm.
and she didn't speak the language, she didn't speak English, and you know, people would make faces here and there when we were out in public, and it's just something that always irked me. Um, so that was something I was always fearful, for some reason, always fearful about my grandma, because obviously she's elderly, doesn't know the English language, um, and isn't kind of aware of her surroundings. So that was something that I was always concerned about growing up.
Did you have so I mean after 9/11, so eighth grade, that's a year before high school. I mean, did you have other friends that were also Muslim that you could talk to with this about, or did you feel kind of on your own?
I did, just because generally there weren't many Muslims in my
Yeah.
class, and I think they probably felt the same way. Others that were of the faith, that it's not going to be something that is going to be a big part of their identities. I think that so one thing that nearby, there's an Islamic school. It's a private school. Uh, we would have protesters in front of the school.
Oh wow.
They'd have their American flags. They and they would just protest. And we actually had to have security. They had to have security around the school, just because of the number of protesters right after 9/11. So I can imagine for those, for kids from kindergarten on to eighth grade, that sight is extremely terrifying. That you don't belong. So that's something that kind of stuck with me. Driving past that school, is seeing that was a kind of a shock to me.
Yeah, I mean, geez, I mean, I've never even had anything close to that type of situation where people are literally protesting who you are
Yeah,
as a person. I can't even imagine, man. And that's just like it just breaks my heart to hear stories like that. But unfortunately, it was probably extremely common, and it's something
yeah.
that you just dealt with. Um, did you talk with your parents about 9/11 at all, or like not necessarily the event, but when I say 9/11, I'm talking about the aftermath and the blowback against your community. Was that something that you guys talked about of like, hey, we have to be careful, or was that discussed in the home at all?
Honestly, no. A lot of that was kind of private.
Yeah,
I think we were all thinking about it, but we never really had that discussion. Um, and it's just something that we kind of live with. Is we felt pretty small and insignificant. It's like, is this something? I mean, we can't really control the aftermath, but I think we felt that just being on alert around your surroundings, that was a big thing. But it was kind of a reality that we couldn't overcome. That's something that I kind of felt, throughout high school. Not so much in college, but throughout high school. Is
yeah.
that just something that you just gonna have to deal with? That's just a part of your life, your reality.
So what changed in college for you then? You mentioned it was kind of through high school that you had to just deal with it, but what
Yeah.
then changed in college?
Yeah, I mean, freshman year, I would say, other than fasting, I really wasn't very connected to the faith. I mean, following the rules, yeah, and um, second semester of freshman year, I was doing some volunteer work, and there was another Muslim girl that was part of the president of the Muslim Student Association. So she's like, "Hey, you're one of the few Muslims that I know that volunteers. Why don't you head up our volunteer branch of this student organization?" Um, so that's kind of my introduction. It wasn't necessarily through going to the mosque. It was service was something that it was a big part of my life at that time. So that kind of introduced me to other Muslims and getting a broader understanding. Um, I also think that for me, taking that leap into the faith, a lot of it I would say comes from the people that were around me.
Hmm.
You, Keenan, Will, even. I mean, there's a few people that I felt like were not very big on peer pressure, and I felt you were pretty, straight edge for most of
Yeah,
college. So, you know, being surrounded around people that did not impose that lifestyle was really helpful for me to make that transition into faith, into the Muslim student organization. So
that's
yeah, good.
no. Go ahead, keep going.
No, and I think that being around people that had a better understanding, that came from different lifestyles within the Muslim student organization, really gave me a better understanding of it. I think my relationship to Islam changed quite a bit, just because it was something that it's tough for me to say this, that I was not only kind of wasn't something that I was proud of, to something to take pride in. So that shift happened going into my sophomore year.
That's really cool. That's kind of the beginning of being a little bit more. I mean, being comfortable in your own skin kind of diminishes it a little bit, but I think that's kind of what it is. What sorts of things were being talked about? I mean, in this organization that you joined that started to make you feel more comfortable. Was it just the ability to even have those conversations, or was there anything pivotal that you started discussing as a community that just made you feel more a
Yeah,
part of it?
yeah, and I think it was just the education. I never had an environment where I felt uh, comfortable asking those questions. I think in like weekend school, I don't know if this is your experience, but um, you know, there is no questioning. This is what it is, and that's it. This was the first time where I could ask questions very openly. Challenge challenge things that I wasn't clear about. Um, and the responses, the answers were not judgmental. That to me was pretty powerful. That I could ask these questions freely and have a better understanding from a position of curiosity.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, not having that before to go into that, it's got to be such a load off your back too. Um, do you remember what sorts of questions you were asking? Like, was there any big ones that you're like, this just doesn't make sense, or somebody help me through this?
Yeah. I think just, you know, how do we know that this is the right faith? I
Mm,
mean, there are tons of religions out there, and what is the connection? One thing that I kind of discovered is the link between those faiths. Is that Islam is not necessarily distinct from Christianity or Judaism. The way we see those faiths is that these are the people of the book, and this is a continuation of that faith. So, the prophets that Judaism has, and Christianity have, um, those are our prophets as well. So by having that understanding that this is not something that's distinctly different, this is not we're not worshiping a different God. Uh, Maybe the understanding of God is a bit different, but the fact that this is a continuation, that we share the same stories, of these, of largely, like, 70%, 80% of the world population, was something that made sense to me. And I think that, you know there are some major distinctions, but generally I think that was the big question for me, is that how do we know we're right? And I think that that continuation of faith, and the fact that uh, there may be a grain of truth in other faiths, that have changed over time. I think that's something that also kind of gave me some broader perspective, is that, you know Hinduism, other religions that are out there, Buddhism, there may have been a grain of truth, but that's changed over time. We have this belief that, every community has had, a messenger, and that was something that, um, I wasn't aware of. Is that, it wasn't that Islam is the only faith. There were other religions over time, that had somebody provide them guidance, but over time, that time changes things. And part of that change is that, not having a guide or reference, a source to go back to, and sometimes in history that gets lost. So that was one thing that was pretty impactful, to me, is having that linkage, between the different religions.
yeah, I mean, that's the most fascinating thing for me too. And honestly, like that question that you posed of how do we know that we're right? That's the biggest question that I still have as I figure out like what I'm about. And I think when I was growing up, I viewed Christianity, the church that I belong to, it was you either believe in this or you don't. If you don't, you're going to hell. If you do believe in it, you're going to heaven because you have to, believe in Jesus Christ in order to do whatever there is in the afterlife. And that terrified me. And it never made sense to me that this really small population of people across the world, Christians, know better than anybody else or any other religion. So that's a very, very that rings true to me as well. But it sounds like you got an answer that made sense for you, which is that consistency of the religion and how everything kind of intertwines. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the one thing that, going back to preservation of faith, the the book that the book that's close to us is the Quran, and the fact that, you know we didn't have, people that were interpreting the book. It's our belief that these are the words of God. And, with that is that the miracle in itself is that these words have been preserved for over 1400 years. There hasn't been a change, and that's something that, uh, Islam prides itself on. This is something that, historically, maybe other faiths, that has caused maybe their demise in our view. But the fact that this has been preserved, and not just in text form but memorization, and it's something that's big, in our faith, is those that memorize the entire book. That's something in itself, that's, uh, quite unique, that hasn't changed over time.
Yeah, that's true. So we have this organization that you're a part of, kind of asking questions, finding out what you're about. When did it click for you of like, oh, I have faith in this now, whereas that was lacking before because I was more focused on the social and cultural aspect of it. Was it like a bell that went off, or was it gradual over time where it's like, okay, I get to a point where like I do believe in God, I do believe in Allah because of this.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think there was I can't recall at least a single moment that made that shift, but I think it was, um, the process of learning over time, meeting different people, within my faith, that that kind of reaffirmed that. So it was the continual knowledge of the religion, and that gave me the proof that I needed. That that this was the true faith, at least to me.
When you're asking these questions, I mean, I would assume inevitably you'd find out things that are a little bit more uncomfortable instead of reaffirming. I mean, did you run across any of those types of situations?
Um, I did. You know, I uh, one thing that that came up and is just conflict in Islam,
Hmm.
because that's kind of our history, specifically around the Prophet's time, is that there was conflict, there was tension, um, and you know my understanding of other faiths is that there is kind of this pacifist element to it, whereas Islam is kind of there is that tension, but I think that was kind of grappling that and understanding that. That was a bit of a challenge, but I think one thing that kind of reassured me is that with life there's tension. We can't live a life that's bad. I mean, it's ideal to be peaceful, but there's the realities that our lives are kind of um, the stems with tension, whether it be conflict with others, and how you address that. I think that's something that was a challenge to me, understanding that. But I think that, not to get into kind of a history lesson, but contextualizing that conflict, the tension, was important to me. So
Uh,
yeah,
I think the history's always good, man. So feel free if you gotta. I mean, look, we're I didn't grow up in this faith, since you're gonna know a lot more than I am. You're the expert here.
right, right. So yeah, like so Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was in Mecca. That was where he was born and raised. And during that time, during his prophethood, it wasn't his entire life. It was the last few years of his life, that he experienced a lot of abuse, verbal abuse, physical abuse, and he had to withstand that for years. Um, when he made his migration to Medina, that put a shock to a lot of people, a lot of different tribes, and that caused some conflict. Is that this person, this faith is building momentum? Let's try to appease him with things, money, giving him greater status, and uh, rejecting those requests, those asks from these tribes in that time, was something that was caused a bit of tension. So it led to physical conflict, and there are a lot of stories about conflict in Islam, but there's very little understanding of the history that built up to that conflict. So it wasn't something that the Prophet Muhammad was a warmonger, that was imposing conflict on others. Um, it was actually the exact opposite, is that he found himself in conflict. And if you were to be a pacifist in those times, the faith would have ended.
Hmm.
So I think defending oneself was something that was big around that time. And that was a big that was something that took time for me to understand that. But also just interactions with other faiths, there's this I guess this narrative that maybe there's a bit of intolerance with Islam to other faiths. But I mean, there's so many stories throughout that time and those that preceded it of Christians and Jews having a special place in the religion, where they were protected. There was a story I actually just read about, one of the friends of the prophet, who became a leader of the community, heard about uh, a church that was demolished in what's today present day Iraq, and he was irate about that. Is that what was the reason to demolish this church? Because Christians hold a special place. They're called the Ahl al-Kitab, the people of the book. So that example, and he ordered this individual to rebuild the church, that was that community that was kind of displaced. So stories of that really kind of combated some of those narratives about Islam being a religion of conflict, of tension, of aggressors, because that was something that I've got a post 9/11. You hear on not to insult anybody, but Fox News had these pundits speak all about what the religion truly is about. So I think getting a better understanding of that narrative, and kind of dispelling some of those misconceptions. That was something that was a challenge, but I think I was able to understand through more of a history lesson.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's super important, and it's cool that you're able to take something that you're uncomfortable with and try to figure it out through faith and through some of the the writings that go along with it. You mentioned something here, and I want to be as respectful as I can when I ask this. You mentioned, you've called it the prophet, but when you mentioned the prophet's name, you said peace be upon him. Is that part of, when you say the prophet's name, we need to put respect on it, and so that's why we say that afterward? Is that the reason for that?
Absolutely, yeah, and it's not just Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. It's also the other prophets.
Mm-hmm.
We also say the same thing for for Jesus. We also say the same thing for Abraham, for Moses. So it's really to kind of honor the prophets that brought the faith.
Sure. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I was just curious because I think we hear that a lot. We hear the different linguistics. I mean, Christians have their own weird stuff that they do sometimes. You're like, why the hell would you even say that? But when you're in the faith every day, it's just kind of commonplace.
And
So,
the other thing that with that is that so that in itself is a prayer.
oh, okay,
So when you say peace be upon him, it's a prayer to the prophet. Um, um, so that's something. Prayer is a big part of our tradition, and commemorating the prophets, obviously, one of the biggest components of it.
got it. Cool. Um, all right, so we've got some of the conflict within the Muslim group that you had joined at DePaul. Where did your faith go from there? I mean, was it more of the same throughout college? Did it grow, and then what happens after?
Yeah, no, I think that it continued to grow as I became more involved with the Muslim Student Association. It also gave me opportunities to really branch out. Like I said, service is a big part of my college experience, and I was introduced to a few different organizations. One of which was an organization based in the South Side called the Inner City Muslims Action Network. So the organization was largely serving a very diverse community. So they were based in what's arguably one of the more dangerous areas on the South Side, and I was involved with that organization. But to see how uh, this organization that is largely serving people that are not of the same faith um, was pretty impactful to me.
Hmm.
To see that service component, I think that kind of reinvigorated it uh, of what Islam should be, is a faith that provides a service to those that are less fortunate. So I think that's something that really kind of reinvigorated not only my interest in Islam but also this concept of service that kind of carried me throughout even graduation.
Is Islam like a service and works based religion?
Yeah, I mean, there's a we have pillars in Islam.
Yeah.
One of which is charity, and charity can come in different forms. So that's something that's incumbent upon Muslims is to provide charity. The concept is called the phrase is zakat. So this is something that essentially it's a tax that all Muslims of a if you have a certain income level, you're required to provide that charity to those that are less fortunate. So that's something that's really embedded within our faith is to give. And generosity is something that's really important. So I think that's something that to what you've mentioned is a big part of our culture as a faith.
Yeah, that makes sense. I remember I think I took a an Islam class, a history of Islam class, probably because of you, honestly. And I remember learning about those pillars. How many pillars are there again?
So there's five.
There's
The first of which is the Shahada. It's declaring that there is only one God and the Prophet Muhammad is his messenger. The second pillar is what I mentioned is the charity,
mhm.
zakat. The third pillar is salah, so praying 5 times a day. The fourth of which is Hajj, so doing a pilgrimage to Mecca once in your lifetime. And then the fifth pillar is fasting. Um, so that's really kind of the core elements of the religion is participating in those five pillars.
Got it. Have you been able to get to Mecca?
Not yet, but it's something that it's an aspiration of mine. I think there's a couple of things. Is that some people believe that they need to be kind of spiritually ready to make that leap
Mm.
because it's a once in a lifetime opportunity. So that's something that I'm trying to get spiritually prepared for before making that leap. Because the idea is that once you've gone to Mecca to do this pilgrimage, like the Prophet did 1400 years ago, um, that you know it's as if you're a new person. You've gone through this kind of rebirth process. So I just want to make sure that I'm spiritually ready for that journey.
How will you know? Have you thought about what that looks like?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think that that's something that I've been kind of struggling with for years is when am I going to be ready for
Hmm.
it? Because you'll never perfect your faith. It's something that you're continuing to strive for. Um, but it, I don't have an answer to that question. I don't have an answer to that question.
Yeah, I mean that's it's a tough one, right? Like,
Right.
when will you be ready in your faith to go do something that is solidifying your faith and making it stronger? So I get that. That's gonna be fun though, man. I mean, I know it's a very very heavy experience, but watching people do that on there. Like I remember we watched in that Islam class, we watched you walk around. What are they walking around again? I feel
The
so ignorant right now. By
no,
the
no, no, no.
way.
So there's the Kaaba.
Mhm.
So they walk around the Kaaba 7 times. So there are certain rituals that you have to do um, during the time when you make your pilgrimage. One of which is kind of historic and very monumental, as you see people going around this brick building um, 7 times.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, it just people. There's thousands of people that are going around this thing, and you can just tell it means so much to everybody. It's just powerful, even watching a video of it.
Yeah,
Um, so college ends. We go through this experience. You're asking questions, kind of solidifying your faith, filling in some of the gaps where maybe you have problems. What happens for us after? I mean, we lost kind of touch. So I mean,
yeah,
you
yeah.
you obviously you got a couple kids, you got married, so that part went well, obviously. But I mean, how did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, so I actually, right after college, I went overseas to Egypt. I was teaching English for a few months. So that was kind of in itself a pretty cool experience. Being in an environment which was largely Muslim.
Yeah,
Uh,
because
so
you'd never had that before, right? I
no,
mean,
no.
yeah,
So that was a cool experience in itself. Is getting kind of more of a global perspective on the faith. And there's also a lot of historical monuments there in Egypt. So it was something that was really powerful to me. Is you know this is an opportunity to get to kind of really reinvigorate the faith and take what I want because I really wanted to do service. Service, like I said, was a big part of my life in high school, in college, in high school as well. But um, so that as I came back to the states after the summer, I jumped into working for a Muslim organization, nonprofit organization. I did that for a few years, but a lot of it was really kind of based on providing service opportunities, charity to those that were less fortunate. The organization I was involved in for about 4.5, 5 years provided global relief to countries across East Africa, Middle East, South Asia. So I had opportunities to go back to some of these countries, to see the service at work.
that's really cool. Um, so Egypt, I mean that has to be a huge pivotal moment for you, just from a faith perspective, because it kind of builds up. You
Yeah.
learn all this stuff, and then you're just immersed in people that believe the same things that you do. I mean, was there anything that was surprising or that stands out about your time there from like a faith and religion
Yeah.
perspective?
It was actually unique because there's there's a wide spectrum of people of different faiths, even just their relationship to faith. What I found surprising was, there were people that were very connected to the faith, and there was others that really didn't had a very loose connection to the faith. So
Hmm.
I guess going into Egypt, I had this impression that everybody was the same, that everyone's
Yeah, that's my
relationship
impression.
to Islam was the same. But
Right.
the fact that there was a spectrum of connection to faith, there were people that were atheist, agnostic, that that was something that was pretty unique. That kind of shocked me, to be quite honest. Is that the relationships that we have in the states to faith as Muslims um, parallel to those that are largely Muslim countries in terms of the connection they have to their faith.
Got it. My cousin went to Egypt as part of a like a senior or college present or whatever with one of his buddies, and his family's from Egypt. And they were saying that every time you go to like a monument or the pyramids or whatever, you have all these people just trying to scam you to get on like this camel or like
Oh,
this
right, yeah.
horse or whatever. Like, did you do any touristy stuff out there that was fun?
Yeah. So yeah, we did the pyramids, the Sphinx. So a lot of that stuff. But for me, I was able to. So there's one of the oldest universities in the Middle East, maybe the world, Al Azhar University. It's an Islamic school. So I had a chance to kind of participate and listen to a couple of different lectures from some of the most renowned scholars. So I think that's something that I took away from that experience is to be able to access this kind of freely. So that was something that I really appreciated and kind of made that experience memorable, is to be able to sit down in those and develop friendships with those that have the same faith but also have a different perspective on it. Um, yeah,
That's really cool. That's awesome. Yeah, you don't really hear about like universities outside of like the U.S. and then I can think of like Cambridge and so that's cool. I mean that you don't ever think about how old these places
yeah,
are. I mean, it's the oldest thing in the U.S. is what like 300 or 400 years old if you're a
right,
university.
yeah.
So that's really cool. Um, so when did you get married? When did you meet your wife? And I mean, is she from the same faith? How does that whole
Yeah,
like thing
yeah.
work?
So she actually, I knew her in college. So
Oh,
we
cool.
were involved in the same organization. I believe she was the vice president. I was the president. And we
Power
just
couple.
right, there you go. Yeah, so we stayed in touch throughout the summer and ended up getting engaged the following year, right after college.
Oh, nice.
And we got married and started our journey from there.
Um, what is uh, what does an Islamic wedding look like?
Yeah. So there are two things that happen. So we go to the sheikh or the imam, and we get Islamically married. So basically, it's a conversation about what are your responsibilities to her as her husband. The same thing in terms of the spouse, sorry, the wife. What are her responsibilities? But the idea is that and it's relatively brief. But the idea is really understanding what are you getting into. So that was one component, and then there's the other component is probably similar to most weddings in the U.S. is that it's just a celebration you have. The one thing is that they are separate, so men will be in one specific hall, women will be in another specific hall, um, because having that separation is also a part of the faith, is making sure that there is a bit of that segregation when it comes to that. So we did have a separate wedding, which 50-50. You might have Muslims have mixed weddings, but we our wedding was a bit separate. We were able to see each other and dance and all that stuff, but uh, that's the one thing that's a bit maybe different than other weddings out there.
Yeah, that's definitely unique. I mean, what do you have any thoughts? I mean, obviously we're in a world right now where it's all about, equality and people being at the same opportunity to pursue whatever they might want to
Sure.
pursue. That sounds like it might be a little bit counter to what, you're talking about with that. You use the term segregation or, divided or whatever it is, but like have you thought about that? Is that bothersome to you? Is it just something that you accept? What's that look like for you?
Yeah. So I mean, we believe that uh, for us to have things separate, even in prayer, one thing that probably if you didn't have never attended a Muslim prayer, is that the women don't pray next to the men. So there's that separation, and I think that the one thing is that um, it's not to say that women are beneath men. In fact, it's the exact opposite. Is that we put them on a pedestal. We elevate their status in our faith, and you know, for us, modesty is extremely important, both male and female modesty, and this is a form of modesty, and this is essentially intended to preserve that. Their rights, and really kind of elevate women to a different status, which might be a bit different. I mean, others might interpret that to be different, but um, the root of that is rooted in modesty, for both faiths, not just both genders, not just for women.
Got it. And even modesty from like a party perspective, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay, cool. And how many kiddos we got running around now?
Two boys, two
Two
boys.
boys.
Yeah, so they're a
Uh,
handful, 6 and 4.
oh my gosh, yeah, that is sounds like a ton. I mean, what's as parents and both Muslim parents. I mean, what's it like raising kids? I mean,
Yeah,
what's the protocol, and do they get to see what else is out there? Are they going to be raised in the religion?
yeah,
How do you think about that type of stuff?
yeah. So that's a good question. I mean, for us, and one thing that I think I was extremely blessed and privileged to have, to be in very lucky situations. I think that I want to make sure that my kids have a good opportunity to really understand the faith in a healthy way. Um, and it stems from the schools that they go to, how we treat one another, just the example that we set. So it's not just teaching, but also just setting a good example. And it's important for me that they have a good understanding of Islam, that's rooted in reality, rooted into the life of the Prophet, and how we should be treating each other as an example of that. So I think that, you know my experience with my kids is that they can be hectic, they're very impulsive. I mean, that's just kids in general, that they're not going to be able to make informed decisions about their religion, at such a young age, and I think that just confuses them. So I think for me, it's really important that, they have an understanding of the religion, and later on in life, my hope is that they have their the religion is deeply rooted within their hearts, where they can interact with those of different faiths, and be able to make decisions for themselves. But ultimately, my goal for them is to be strong Muslims.
Yeah, I mean, wouldn't expect any other answer from you. I don't think. Um, I mean, I think too. It's only natural. Like I think about the way that I was raised and things that I'm going to do different, and I'm assuming that you have those thoughts too, and specifically from like a Muslim perspective. I mean, is there anything that either you were taught or the way that you were taught that you're going to do different because of the way that you grew up? Is there anything that sticks out?
Yeah, I mean, I think that having just a loving relationship to the religion,
Hmm.
is one that's not imposed with fear, um, uh, not one that's imposed with like being a disciplinarian. I think that's something that I kind of learned, not from necessarily from my parents, but from the school, the weekend schools that I was that was involved in, is that, um, and being able to answer the questions as uncomfortable as they are. Um, my younger one, my 4-year-old, he goes to a private Islamic school. So he asks me all the time very thought-provoking questions. It's like, man,
Hmm.
I'm amazed that, because I wasn't having these conversations up until college, let alone this 4-year-old's having these questions. So it allows me to kind of re-examine things, uh, and to really put some thought to it. And I never want to dismiss the questions, um, because I want him to be able to ask those questions and feel comfortable with those answers. So that's something that, it's kind of a blast from the past, because I haven't had those challenges, in years. That's what I want for my kids, is to know that they can ask any questions they have for me, and feel comfortable with that.
Yeah, it probably helps just reaffirm your own faith too, and
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I think that constant questioning is healthy. Is it what's been like the one that's been like, wow, how did you even come up with that question?
Yeah, that's a good one. I'm trying to think. Um, the one question that came up probably more recently, I don't know if it's the best one, but where did Allah come from?
Hmm.
So,
Yeah, good
uh,
luck.
right. So yeah, I mean, it's thought provoking, and I think at his age, I mean, at any age, is that, that's going to be a question that's going to be tough to answer. But it's something that I'm still thinking about and how to answer that. But um, he's asking. I think he's asking the right questions. It's just a matter of time for him to come up with his own answers.
Yeah, I mean, what did you say to him when he asked, "Where did all that come from?"
Well, my answer was that Allah has been here forever.
Hmm.
So it's not like there's a source. He wasn't born. He's been here forever. So there was no birth to him. Which I think for a kid that is around life, understands birth, and not death yet, but understands kind of the cycle of life. That's something that's very difficult to grasp. Uh,
Yeah,
so I'm not sure if he was satisfied with the answer, but I mean that's the best answer I could give him. Because there's some questions that you know are very difficult for a child to grasp.
yeah. I mean, it's if like you said before, if you're having these questions in college and even afterwards, and for a kid to be doing that, it's really cool, and I think it's a good sign that he's going to be a little introspective mini Feras. So that's
Right.
great for you.
Yep.
So are you still hooping, by the way?
Not as much.
Yeah.
Actually, believe it or not, I've been doing a lot of football lately.
Oh,
We've had
really?
like these intramural football leagues. So, but I've kind of retired from basketball. I've kind of aged out of
Yeah.
that sport a little bit.
Yeah, your knees can only hold up for so long. I remember one time we went to the Ray, which is the workout center at DePaul, and you would go hoop. I think at least a couple times a week.
Yeah.
And I am not a basketball player. I was semi athletic, but just never really played basketball. I remember Keenan and I went up to shoot some hoops, and you were up there, and we were playing 1-on-1, Keenan and I. And I remember I had the ball and I was like trying my hardest. Like I wasn't trying to be funny. And you just started fucking laughing at me. And I went, for us, man, what do you want to do here? I'm trying my best. But it's I
I'm
picture
sorry for that,
no,
man.
it stuck with me
And
because
I
then
remember it too.
yeah. I picture myself of that scene in The Office of Stanley doing the basketball where he's like got one hand in front. I was like, that's
Right.
probably what I look like, just something ridiculous. But yeah, I gave up hooping a while back too.
Yeah. Yeah. But I know you're in golf now, right? Yeah, that's
Yeah,
your sport.
golf's a sport, if you can call it that. So I'm super big into golf, and that's why my knees are still intact, I guess.
Yeah. Smart.
Right. Well, for us, I mean, this is awesome, dude. I just think it's first of all, I want to, I guess, apologize because I wish we would have had this conversation when we were living together,
Yeah.
and really helped me understand maybe a little bit earlier what I'm about. Because I think when you go through college, and especially like you said, it's the first time living with each other or living with somebody else, you're on your own, somebody you don't really know, um, you just kind of become comfortable and you understand that person has their thing, I have my thing. And, we had different organizations that we were a part of, and it just kind of split. And I wish it hadn't been. I wish we were able to talk about this sooner. So I just appreciate you getting
Yeah.
back to me and setting this up, man. Because,
Yeah, absolutely.
I think especially even learning about things post 9/11 is important for our generation, because I think we were the most impacted, and specifically, Muslim kids were mostly impacted. And it's such a pivotal time in a person's life that I don't think any other generation that believes in, Allah and the Islam faith will ever have to go through. So, just kudos for you for coming out on the other side.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry that you had to go through with stuff like that, man.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I mean, I think that that formed my faith. I mean, going through struggle, going through challenges, it's something that we're all accustomed to. I'm glad kind of in hindsight, I'm glad I went through that experience because it wouldn't have made me who I am today without those challenges. So, and I appreciate, honestly, never said this, but the respect that you gave me in terms of understanding my boundaries. Um, like I said, I mean, you know, be, I couldn't have asked for a better roommate freshman year just because I could have gone somewhere else. And I think that everything happens for a reason. And I owe a lot to you because I don't think I would have gotten to the direction I needed to. If I would have had another roommate that was probably more, imposing or, susceptible to peer pressure.
No, I appreciate that. I think you're too nice. You give me too much credit. It's easy when just two buddies just want to watch Bears and The Office. So it was an easy experience, I think, for both of us. So for us, all the best to your two kiddos and to your wife. Let's hang out soon, man. It's been too
Yeah,
long.
yeah, that sounds good. Let's do
All
it.
right, buddy.
All right, take care.